At some point, almost every artist crosses an invisible line. It's subtle, quiet. You don't even notice it happening. You stop making art and start being an artist. At first, that sounds like progress, like confidence, like finally owning who you are. But over time, something strange happens. You feel more anxious about your work than excited. You hesitate before starting anything new. You overthink every idea. You feel personally threatened by criticism, trends, algorithms, or even other people's success. And the worst part? You feel creatively stuck while telling yourself this is just part of being an artist. This is what I want to talk about today. Not art blocks, not motivation hacks, not productivity systems, but the artist identity trap and how it quietly suffocates the very thing it promises to protect. The moment. Artist stops being a verb. There's a difference between doing art and being an artist. When you first started, art was a verb. You drew because you felt like drawing. You wrote because something needed to come out. You made things badly, messily, freely. No audience, no strategy, no internal brand manager watching over your shoulder. Then somewhere along the way, artist became a noun, a role, a label, a self-concept you now had to live up to. And once art becomes identity, everything changes. You're no longer just experimenting, you're proving something. You're no longer curious, you're defending a reputation. You're no longer playing, you're protecting an image. The work doesn't get freer, it gets heavier. Why the artist's identity feels so important? Let's be fair to it for a moment. The artist's identity doesn't come from nowhere. Most artists felt misunderstood growing up, found refuge in creativity, used art to make sense of emotional chaos, finally felt seen through their work. So of course, artist becomes sacred. It's not just what you do, it's who you are. It's proof that your pain meant something, that your sensitivity had a purpose, that you weren't too much for nothing. Letting go of that identity can feel like betrayal, like saying, if I'm not an artist, then what was all that suffering for? But here's the uncomfortable truth. When identity becomes a shield, it also becomes a cage. The hidden cost of making art, your identity. Once artist becomes who you are, your nervous system gets involved. Now, rejection feels like rejection of you. Criticism feels like an attack on your worth. Creative dry spells feel like existential threats. You're no longer asking, is this interesting? You're asking, what does this say about me? And that question kills creativity, because creativity requires risk, failure, uncertainty, looking foolish, making things that don't fit your voice. Identity hates all of that. Identity wants consistency. Identity wants coherence. Identity wants you to stay recognizable, even to yourself. So you start repeating yourself, not because it's true, but because it's safe. How the trap shows up without you realizing it. The artist's identity trap rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly, disguised as depth or standards or integrity. You might notice you have lots of ideas but rarely finish anything. You feel pressure for every piece to be meaningful. You judge your work while you're still making it. You feel guilty creating anything simple or fun. You avoid sharing work unless it feels perfect. You secretly resent artists who seem carefree. You might call this perfectionism, imposter syndrome, creative burnout, but underneath all of it is the same fear. If this work fails, what does that say about who I am? When art stops being a place to breathe. Originally, art was where you went to feel alive. Now it's where you go to be evaluated, by others and by yourself. You sit down to create and immediately feel tension. Your body tightens, your thoughts speed up. Your inner critic shows up early and loud. That's not a lack of discipline. That's a nervous system under threat. Because the stakes are no longer, did this work? Am I still an artist if this doesn't? And no nervous system creates well under that pressure. The ego disguised as depth. Here's a part that's hard to hear, but freeing if you let it land. The artist identity trap isn't just about insecurity, it's also about ego. Not arrogance, but attachment. Attachment to being seen as deep, being seen as original, being seen as different, being seen as someone who feels more. You start protecting your suffering because it validates your identity. You fear healing because it threatens your edge. You romanticize struggle because it justifies stagnation. Pain becomes proof. Confusion becomes complexity. Chaos becomes authenticity. But none of that guarantees truth. And none of it guarantees good work. Sometimes it just guarantees you stay stuck. Why letting go feels like losing yourself. If you've been an artist for a long time, this question probably scares you. If I stop identifying as an artist, who am I? This is where many people turn back. They'd rather stay creatively blocked than face that emptiness. But here's the reframe. You're not losing yourself. You're losing a story about yourself. And stories can be rewritten. You don't become less creative when you loosen your grip on identity. You become more available. Available to curiosity, available to surprise, available to making work that doesn't match your past. Identity says, this is who I am. Creation says, let's see what happens. Only one of those can stay alive long term. The difference between expression and self-definition. There's a quiet shift that changes everything. Stop using art to define yourself. Start using art to explore. When art is exploration, you don't need every piece to represent you. You don't panic when something doesn't land. You're willing to follow strange impulses. You allow phases, contradictions, detours. You stop asking, is this me? And start asking, is this interesting right now? That shift alone removes enormous pressure. What happens when you make art? Smaller, in a good way. One of the biggest lies artists internalize is this work has to matter. But what if it doesn't? What if some work is allowed to be a sketch, a draft, a side thought, a curiosity, a throwaway experiment? When you make art smaller, you make yourself safer. And when you feel safe, creativity returns. Not as brilliance, not as genius, but as movement. And movement matters more than identity ever will. You are not your output. This might be the most important sentence in this essay. You are not your work. Not the good pieces. Not the bad ones. Not the ones that got attention. Not the ones that didn't. Your work is something you do, not something you are. The moment you truly absorb that, a lot of fear dissolves. You can fail without collapsing, change direction without shame, outgrow styles without guilt, rest without feeling fraudulent. And paradoxically, your work often improves because it's finally free to evolve. The artist identity trap versus the creative life. The artist identity wants a fixed self. The creative life wants motion. The artist identity wants recognition. The creative life wants honesty. The artist identity asks, how am I being perceived? The creative life asks, what feels alive right now? One leads to self-consciousness. The other leads to presence. And presence, not pain, not struggle, not identity, is where real work comes from. A gentle way out of the trap. You don't need to renounce being an artist. You don't need to burn your past. You don't need to reinvent yourself overnight. Just loosen the grip. Try this instead. Create something you'll never share. Make something deliberately unimportant. Follow an impulse without explaining it. Let a piece be unfinished and move on. Allow yourself to change your mind. Each small act says to your nervous system, my worth is not on the line here. That message is everything. What if the point was never to be an artist? Here's a final question we're sitting with. What if the point was never to be an artist, but to be someone who keeps creating? Someone curious, someone responsive, someone alive to experience. Those people don't need an identity, they need permission. And you don't need to earn that permission. You just need to stop withholding it from yourself. The artist identity trap doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you care deeply. It means the art mattered to you. It means it once saved you. But what saves you at one stage of life can limit you at another. You're allowed to grow past the version of yourself that needed art as armor. And on the other side of that letting go, not emptiness, but a quieter, steadier creativity. One that doesn't ask who you are, only what you want to explore next.